Hello, testing one, two, three. Hey Siri, turn on Do Not Disturb.
Okay, do not disturb is now on.
Hello, testing 1, 2, 3. Hello, testing 1, 2, 3. Hi, Luana. This is David Van Nuys. We're supposed to be having our interview right now. Yeah, let me figure that out here. I generally have kind of automatic ways of sending it. Let's see here. Oh, that's not good at all. Let's see here. Okay. And unfortunately, they didn't give me your email address either. Uh, oh, yeah, you did get in. That's good because I was being slow. Okay, yes. I see your still photo. Ah, there
Okay,
you
here we
are.
go.
Yeah.
Hello. Now that's much
Hi.
better.
Hi. Glad we got it. I'm glad we got it together here.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. I was trying so hard and I couldn't figure it out, but they just sent me the new link. So thank you.
Okay. And let's see here. In the, are you able to go to the chat area and put your email address in the chat area? That would be a good way for me to have it.
Done.
Done. Oh boy, that was fast. Okay. Yeah, I see it there. Wait a second. Yeah.
So it's just Dr. Luana at drluana.com.
Okay, I'm going to copy that so I have it.
Thank you so much. And I'm sorry for being a little late.
That's okay. I'm just glad that you're here with no more difficulty, no more challenge than we've had. And so congratulations on your book, by the way.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah. Now tell me how to pronounce your name properly.
So it's Luana Marques.
The sound kind of went out. Say your last name again.
Marques.
Marquise?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is Portuguese the language?
It
Portuguese the
is.
language in Brazil? Yeah.
That is correct. Yeah,
Okay.
that is correct.
Yeah. Okay, let me just scroll back up here. So do you have any questions for me before we get going here?
No questions. Just
Okay.
delighted to be here.
And is your time kind of open-ended? Typically, we run about 45, 50 minutes, but if we go over, is that going to be a problem? Do you have an appointment we're going to bump into?
No, it should be okay.
Okay. And so once we are over, I have to resize something here. Thought I had everything set up. Once we come to the end, hang around and I'll tell you about what to expect in terms of the deliverables. Okay?
Okay, sounds great.
Okay. And I don't know if you're aware, I'm also a psychologist and so a clinical psychologist trained at the University of Michigan. So we probably have some things in common.
I'm sure we do.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to welcome you and you say some version of thank you and we'll be off and running here. A second, I do have to slide something over. All the elements of my screen got shifted somehow. Weird. Okay, I think that's good. Okay, so I'm going to welcome you and you say some version of thank you, and we will be off and running.
Let's do it.
Dr. Luana Marques, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thanks for having me, David. I'm delighted to be here with you today.
Well, I'm delighted to have you here as well. And we're going to be talking about your new book, Bold Move, a three-step plan to transform your anxiety into power. Wow. That's a bold statement right there.
It is. It is. That's why I had to call it Bold Move because, we all have lots of anxiety, but we don't have to be stuck.
Yeah, yeah. And so one of the things I really like about this book is that there's so much self-disclosure in it, because it's so easy for people to assume that, well, here you are, an accomplished professor with all kinds of things, books to your credit and so on, and you're at Harvard University, so life must be really easy for you, and you probably were born with a silver spoon in your mouth. So we'll try to focus not only on your accomplishments, but also be really helpful if we can have you be as give as much self-disclosure as possible as we go along about your own challenges and that you had to overcome. And so before we get into all of that, maybe you can give our audience a bit of a sketch of your your training and your professional background.
Sure. I'm currently Associate Professor of Psychology at Harvard Medical School. I'm a clinical psychologist at Mass General Hospital in Boston. And my real passion is to teach skills to as many people as possible. So for the last, 20 years of my career, really, I've gone from the ivory tower back to the streets. And a lot of the work I do is training paraprofessionals, so individuals with no psychological training.
Oh.
The skills are in the book so that they can teach it to inner city youth who themselves are having lots of trouble. So I've worked with young men coming out of prison, single mothers, immigrants, individuals that really have a lot of challenges, and I teach them the skills in the book.
Wow, that is wonderful. That really addresses some of the concerns that I might have had and asked you about, and we'll go into it in a little bit more depth as we go along. Maybe now you grew up in Brazil, and again, I say people might have the fantasy that maybe since you're at Harvard, you were born with a silver spoon, a wealthy family that could afford to send you to Harvard and so on. Oh, tell us what it was really like you're growing up. What were the anxieties that you had to confront?
Growing up was really hard. My parents had my sister and I very young. They were in their 20s. There were a lot of drugs and alcohol, and a lot of domestic violence. And so as a kid, I was a very anxious kid. I realized actually, as I was writing this book, I called my mom and I said to her, do you remember how I had those asthma attacks? And my mom is like, yeah, I would rush you to the hospital when, you needed to get oxygen and you couldn't breathe. And I said to her, I think I wasn't having asthma attack because once my father left and domestic violence ended, I never had an asthma attack again. So very likely what I had is panic attacks. And in fact, we know in the Latin culture, kids are more likely to talk about anxiety as physical symptoms. And that's certainly what happened to me. I was definitely a very anxious kid and had to overcome a lot to get to where I am.
Oh, wow. What's the difference between fear and anxiety?
So I think about fear. Well, they both had the same kind of biological response, right? But when we're talking about fear, usually we're talking about real threats. So you're face to face with a lion, you're crossing the street and an ambulance is bearing down towards you. When we think about anxiety, there's other components that happen with anxiety. So you have the same fight, flight, or freeze response, but anxiety also has a lot of thinking involved. So when you're really, really anxious, a lot of people I've worked with get stuck on their thinking. what if? What if I can't do this? What if I'm not good enough? What if my significant other doesn't love me enough? And those kind of thoughts tend to lead to a lot of more emotional symptoms of anxiety, heart pounding, dizziness, sweating. And often people get stuck just avoiding anything that makes them anxious.
Okay. And so then somehow you got to Harvard, and tell us about that journey. How did that come about? I mean, that's a big reach considering the environment that you grew up in.
It is, yeah. So I always wanted to be an exchange student. For some reason in my brain, that was like the thing to do.
Uh-huh.
And when I was 18, I had an opportunity to become an exchange student. I lived in a town called North Tonawanda, right outside of Buffalo. I was there for a year. So when I came at 18 in my senior year of high school, I spoke no English. And so the first 6 months were really hard. Brazil is really hot. Buffalo is really cold. But eventually I settled in. My American family, to this day, I call them mom and dad, and they were just so welcoming. And I really found myself here. My grandmother jokes that I was born in the wrong country because she's like, you're so much more American than you're Brazilian. And so I wanted to stay. And my mom at that point said, we can't do this. And eventually I was able to come back. My stepdad at the time had some financial means and helped me with college a bit. And so then the rest, I just worked really hard. Like from the time I got to the US, my first job was making pizza so I could buy snow boots for the winter because I didn't have any. And I, served as a research assistant, did my undergraduate at SUNY Buffalo, and then continued there. And it wasn't until graduate school that I realized that like how much of a trauma history I had. It was the first time I started to work with somebody that had domestic violence, and I was like, oh, that is trauma. And, in growing up, that's what I assumed happened. I knew a lot of my friends, also families, had domestic violence. And so I then got to graduate school and I just worked really hard and eventually got myself here at Harvard Medical School.
Yeah. It's clear that you are a very hard worker. So what were some of the anxieties that you had to confront during that process? It sounds like hard work was part of your solution to kind of double down. As a matter of fact, is that a recommended way of dealing with anxiety? Or is that a pathology?
Well, I think our strengths are our weaknesses in many ways. And so I think one strength that I learned from my mom was hard work. She had 3 jobs to feed us. And so the idea of working hard was instilled on me since I was a little kid. And I think up to a point in my career that really helped. To answer your question, what were the strategies and the anxieties? At age 15, I think, is when my life started to change. I went to live with my grandmother in a bigger town. So I moved from Governador Valadares to Belo Horizonte. And I became really scared of strangers. I probably was developing what we now know as social phobia. And, I just was studying it. And my grandmother noticed it. And one day said to me, let's go to the mall and let's eat Chinese food. I was so excited, had never had Chinese food. I was like, this is going to be so exciting. And then we get there and we get the food. And I remember this vividly. She said to me, let's go talk to that older gentleman there. He looks like he needs company. And I was like, I'm not doing this. Like I had all of the symptoms of anxiety. But my grandmother, without a college education, was really smart. And she didn't take no to an answer. And she just forced me to approach my fears instead of avoiding them. And that was a transition point. To answer your question about sort of the fears, I think I'd still be in Brazil. I still would be an anxious kid had I not learned what amounted to exposure therapy for my grandmother. And, eventually, I don't remember how, but eventually that changed the course of my life. And that's what I use day to day is whenever I get anxious to this day, I think about what are my values and how do I approach what matters the most? And, it's not without fear. Being bold is not being fearless. I think being bold is actually moving towards the things that matter and bringing that fear along with you.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, you talk in the book. You talk about the importance of your mother and her strength and perseverance in adverse circumstances, and your grandmother, and then you also talk about science. So somewhere along the way, you got trained in cognitive behavior therapy, and you're very passionate about that approach, right? There are other approaches out there for dealing with anxiety. Uh, so tell us about that journey. And was the process of learning to be a cognitive uh, behavioral psychologist, therapist, was that anxiety arousing?
So, cognitive behavior therapy is a form of therapy that really is about changing what we say to ourselves, choosing to approach instead of avoiding things that makes us anxious. And I fell in love with CBT as an undergraduate. I took a class, and I remember this idea that we could rewire our brain. I think
Yeah.
it was an early 80s study that was pre and post Prozac and pre and post cognitive behavior therapy for obsessive compulsive disorder. And it was a neuroimaging. I think Scott Rausch did that study actually. And I remember reading that as an undergraduate and thinking, oh, I can change my brain by thinking differently. And it
Uh-huh.
resonated a lot with what my grandmother would do. Every time I'd be anxious or afraid, and I'd say, this is the worst case ever. And she's like, well, is there a different way to think about this? And that question, is there a different way to see your world, is at the core of cognitive behavior therapy. So in some ways, by the time I got to graduate school, I've had so much CBT from my grandmother. Then as an undergraduate, I volunteer in a clinic, and they all practice CBT. And I was like, I want to do this. Like this, I just love the idea that people could get better and
Yeah.
that they could become their own therapists.
Yeah. So that sort of transitions us, I think, to this work that you described of moving from the ivory tower into working in the community and actually training non-professionals. So take us through that. That sounds like a wonderful program.
So Community Psychiatry Pride is my research lab at Mass General, and it's a program for research and implementation and dissemination of evidence-based treatments. And I created this in 2014 when I got really frustrated working in Harvard in the ivory tower, seeing patients get better. But then I went into our community clinics and our community organizations and learned that no one had access, especially people like me from diverse settings, had access to CBT. And so in 2014, I partnered with a nonprofit in the Boston area. And that's when we created and developed a CBT curriculum that really is designed to teach paraprofessionals just basic emotion regulation, being able to teach a kid to just even label their emotions. And I'm talking about kids who are coming out of prison, who are not going to school. And we've been able to successfully implement this not only in the Boston area. We created a large project with 2 organizations in Connecticut as well. We've worked in schools. And it's really a question of, I'm not asking them to become therapists. What I'm asking them is, can you learn skills, right? And can we teach those skills in a very basic way, almost as a little dosage of CBT to empower those youth to perhaps change their trajectory like I've been able to change mine?
Yeah. It's incredible because one of the things that I'm always concerned about when I interview therapists of various stripes is how much of the world doesn't have access to therapists, and basically what a Western approach it is. And so in many parts of the world, there would be actual positive resistance. So by focusing on skills, that seems like a big part of it. And then training other people, non-professionals, to have those skills really seems like an important way to go.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I did it. Before the pandemic, 80% of the 80%, 20% of the US population needed mental health care. And since the pandemic, the CDC is reporting 30 to 40% of the US population is having symptoms of anxiety and depression. The World Health organizations suggested that 25% increase in depression since the pandemic. And, I don't know the stats for trained professionals outside of the US, but in the US, it's 0.17% of the US population. So the supply and demand is never going to close if we don't think about it more creatively and really teach skills to as many people that could deliver them.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have a vision or plans to go to other countries to help spread this more widely in the world?
Yes. So I've talked to nonprofits in India already. There is a program in Brazil that we are talking about, and I have a collaborator in Portugal that's also talking about it.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. So in your book, there are 3 skills. You talk about, the title even has 3 in it. And the 3 skills are shift, approach, and align. So take us through those, if you will, along with any struggles that you had around each of those areas or that you tend to observe in people.
Yeah. So before I even dive on the skills, I think the first thing that I talk in the book, which I actually didn't realize how much I was struggling with it, is really this concept of avoidance that, most of the people that come to me that I've worked with, organizations, individuals, they want me to get rid of their anxiety, but anxiety itself is really not what gets us stuck. It's what we do when we are anxious. And for a lot of us, we walk away. I had this tendency that I thought was super productive. Every time I got an email that upset me, I'd respond really fast. And eventually a mentor of mine sat me down and was like, Luana, you really shouldn't be answering emails. And I was like, well, I just want to be productive and I want to, tell her as it is. And she's like, you're your worst enemy. And I paused with that and thought about it. And I was like, why am I responding so quickly? Right. And it's because I was avoiding discomfort. If they may upset me, I would react to try to avoid that discomfort. And yes, momentarily, you feel slightly better when you avoid, but long term, you get stuck, right? And I had to work really hard to reverse the reputation that I was reactive because I would literally react to emails. But there are other ways people avoid as well. So, for example, my husband avoids by retreating. So if he's really anxious, he walks away from that discomfort. So if he got that email, he might just not open the email. Or one day he told me that he has 2 computer screens and he put it on the side. He's like, yeah, I didn't want to look at it. I just, avoided it. And so the book, I start by talking a lot about avoidance, and then I dive into 3 skills. Would it be helpful if I highlight them briefly? Or
yeah, sure.
Sure. So shift is the idea of really widen our perspective. When we're anxious, most of us are in our emotional brain. It's hard to think straight because we're on that fight, flight, or freeze.
Yeah.
Shift is really just shifting your perspective, learning to talk to yourself as if you're talking to a best friend, for example. So my book just released a week ago, and I've been practicing this every day because I wake up and I look at the Amazon sales, and then my brain goes, oh my God, nobody loves your book. It's going to be awful. People are not going to like it. And then I have to pause. Right?
Yeah.
And I have to go, okay, Luana, if you were talking to your best friend, what would you say? And I'd say, okay, the book has only been out for a week. It's impossible for people to know a lot about it. And so by talking to myself differently, then I'm able to sort of cool off my brain and shift my perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it certainly does. Yeah.
So the other skill is approach. And the idea here is that when we're anxious, we walk away from discomfort. Approach is what I call opposite action. It's drawing on dialectical behavior therapy. And, it's basically taking a baby step towards the thing that's making you anxious. So, for example, I had somebody send me a message this week that she's afraid of driving, but she started to read my book and she is just driving around the block in her house for a few minutes every day to try to overcome that fear.
Yeah, baby steps, right?
Baby steps, exactly.
Yeah.
And then finally, align is really living a value-based life so that you are aligning your daily activities with your values. And for me, this book comes out of alignment. I really was in a place in my career that I wanted to be able to bring the skills to more people. And so writing the book was my way to align impact with my daily actions.
It's interesting that that values play a role in this approach, because when I think of behaviorism, somehow I don't think of values.
Yeah. So the third wave of cognitive behavioral therapy, right, is where Stephen Hayes created acceptance and commitment therapy.
I have interviewed him, as a matter of fact. Yeah.
He's wonderful, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where I draw the values piece is from his work.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he really. I was so surprised by a presentation that he recently gave that just emphasized love uh, a lot,
Mm-hmm.
so I think there's a kind of spiritual component. Seems like he's had a spiritual awakening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because today, David, I have a 5-year-old at home, and I said to him, I said, Diego, do you know who loves you the most? And he looked at me, he's 5, and he says, I love myself the most. Then you love me second. And I thought it was so insightful for him to understand that self-love matters, and you
Yeah,
need to care for yourself.
yeah, yeah. So it's interesting in all your busy career that somehow you got married. You want to share that story with us? And also, entering into marriage can be a very anxiety arousing circumstance.
Yeah, so I met my husband on Match, and we've been together for 10 years. We've been married for 10 years. He is a professor at Boston University School of Public Health. And so I think the first thing is that our values are very aligned from time zero.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things that happened is we got married in a church in Boston that part of the process to get married in this church is that you have 5 sessions with their reverend
Oh,
to
yeah.
just talk about what marriage looks like. And to this day, we talk about this. We really loved it because we got to talk about some of the things that gets couples into trouble, finances, how much time you need apart. I tend to be a lot more outgoing. He tends to be a lot more introvert. But he is my rock. I couldn't have written this book without him. He's just an incredible partner, a supporter, a cheerleader. He's just everything.
Well, that's
It's
great.
a best decision
Congratulations.
I've made.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. One of the things that you say in the book is anxiety is painful, but it's not what's keeping you stuck.
Yeah, what's keeping us stuck is avoidance, is that quick fix, is when you get home from work and you're stressed and instead of exercising, you reach for a drink, or when
Mm.
you're really upset at a partner and instead of having an honest conversation, you just bottle it up, or staying in a relationship that no longer functions well for you, or a job, and continue to do it. That's what keeps us stuck. And that's what maintains that anxiety, because the longer you stay in a situation it's not working, the more anxious you feel.
Yeah, yeah. So, so this approach to therapy is really an approach to life, and um, so it can be part of marriage therapy, even, right?
For sure. I mean,
Or
I
or
actually,
vocational counseling, or just about anything.
it really, I love how you're saying this, David. It's an approach for life. I mean, I talk about this so openly in the book, and I'm glad that you saw that as well. I use these skills every day. Just because I'm trained as a cognitive behavior therapist doesn't mean that my brain sometimes doesn't say things to me they're not so nice, or they're not moments that I'm not scared or fearful. But the skills help me to continue to push towards what matters. It continues to get me unstuck. And it's not like I don't have anxiety. I still have
Yeah,
anxiety. I
yeah,
always will have it, but I don't see myself as an anxious person. I just have anxiety, and anxiety comes along with me.
It seems to me too, also, it's very congruent with meditation. Like I'm thinking of mindfulness meditation, where you become aware of your emotions and your thoughts and so on, but you create a distance of non-judgment towards all that.
I think you're absolutely right. I think, I didn't add much about meditation in my book, but I'm a firm believer. There's a yoga center right outside of Boston called Kripalu, and I've been 20 times myself. I love Kripalu, and this idea of being present, John Kabat-Zinn's word, or, being
Yes.
present non-judgmentally is so important and so powerful, and now backed by science.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely. And let's see, what else do I want to ask you about here? Oh, another point that you make that I think is really important is because I've been taken by the idea that the brain is a prediction machine, and there are different models of the psyche, and that's one of the current ones. And say a bit more about that.
Yeah, I think the brain has two functions. I mean, there's many functions, but two that I think are primary, which is to predict and to protect, right? The protection is our fight, flight, or freeze response, and it's an automatic response. So if we sense threat, we will, be on fight, flight, or freeze. And then it needs to be able to predict what's next, right? So when we learn about fruits, right, you eventually get to a red fruit, a certain shape, it's an apple, and then you don't ever have to think about it again, right? The brain predicts very quickly, which is amazing. Allows us to have this conversation, allows us to do things very efficiently. But because it's a predictive machine, sometimes it's not updated. So the example I give in the book is growing up with as much trauma as I had. At about age 10, my brain basically used the filters of I'm not enough. So even when good things would happen to me, my brain would find a way to prove to me that I wasn't enough. I one time had an article in a major psychological journal get accepted. And it was so strange. Like immediately, my first thought, David, was, oh, we only got published because the co-authors are really smart. I'm not smart.
Oh,
Right now,
yeah.
I'm a professor at Harvard Medical School. And if I was talking to a patient of mine, I'd say, wait a minute, like stupid people don't go to Harvard, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
the two don't add. But the brain is a predictive machine, and it took me years to really rewire that part. So today, very seldom that thought comes up, but once in a while it does. And then I have to like pause and be like, nope, I don't believe this anymore. That's the old narrative.
Yeah, so many people cope with that anxiety, and that I think is also known as the imposter syndrome, right? The feeling that, once they discover how dumb I am, that'll be the end.
That's exactly right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. I was one of those people. And by shifting my perspective today, I can really say, no, I'm good as I am right now. I can do a lot more in my life, but as it is, I'm good enough.
Yeah, me too. I think I definitely went through that during graduate school. And as some of my friends got kicked out for one reason or another, I remember actually approaching one of the people in charge of dropping people from the program. How come you're not dropping me? I'm good friends with that person. Whatever's wrong with them is wrong with me. So I was so
Look at that.
fused with them, and that faculty person said, David, you're not the same as he is. you're a different person. You have different skills and so on. So that was an important piece of learning for me.
That is so, and that's why I talk so much, David, in the book about this idea that we need to learn to talk to ourselves as if we're talking to our best friend or mentor, right? Because he looked at you and saw the true you, not what your brain was predicting you to be.
Yeah.
And, by hearing that, I bet you felt better.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, the thing that's been very helpful for me is interviewing highly accomplished people such as yourself. This podcasting has allowed me to, to have conversations with all kinds of high-powered people and with high-powered credentials and so on. And so there must be something that I've got down that I can do that. So that's
No,
reassuring to
yeah,
me.
you have a fantastic podcast. I'm just so honored to be talking to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. You know, there's something that you have at the conclusion of the book that I think is interesting, and I don't recall where it comes from, but maybe you can take us through that. Becoming bold by being the water, not the rock.
Yeah. So this comes from my grandmother. She used to
Ah,
talk about this idea that there's two sort of kinds of people in life when change happens. So whenever you're in transition, there are the kind of people that are more like the rock. They just basically want to stay put. They don't want to change. They want what their reality is, and they double down on sort of like being where they are. And then there are people that are more like the water, that they go around. So obstacles come, they go around, they go over, they find a way to flexibly continue in their journey, right? The water is never stopped. And I use this as an analogy to talk about, being bold is not being fearless. Be bold is this idea of like understanding your true north. What are your values in your life? What matters the most? And then finding a way to flexibly have a life towards those values so that when life gets hard, and it does for all of us, then you find a way to more flexibly move instead of just getting yourself further stuck.
yeah, I love that. I love that. That's like a koan, and you got that from your grandmother. Yeah, wonderful wisdom there. And so one of the questions that I often ask my guests is, uh, there's a lot to be anxious about right now. It feels
Yep.
like the world is going to hell and falling apart. And, and I need not enumerate all the sources of fear and anxiety around that. What is what is your advice to people of how to not become overwhelmed by all the dire that our predictive brain as it looks ahead gets scared?
For sure. The world is upside down, right? And so the way I manage it is really by controlling what I can control and understanding there's many things that are out of my control. So really, the only certainty we have in many ways is uncertainty. Like you and I don't know if we wake up tomorrow. We'd like to wake up tomorrow, but we don't know.
Yeah.
And so I find ways to sort of carve out my life in a way that I'm taking control of the things I can. I'm helping society. That's why I do community work. I want to be part of building better and stronger
Yes.
communities.
Yes.
I
And
have
you're
this
doing
dream
that.
of,
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
and that's my dream. Like my dream is, can we bring this to as many people in the world so that people themselves have more power to change their systems around them? But there's a certain level of uncertainty that we all have to deal with. And so we control what we can and what we can't. We have to just sit with that discomfort. And I think where meditation and mindfulness comes really handy there.
Yes. Yes. Well, is there anything else you'd like to get in here that some other point that you want to make about your book? Uh, why should people buy this book? I know you want people to buy it. Why should they?
I do want people to buy it, but because I firmly believe that the skills in the book can help people live better, more fulfilling, bolder lives. And that it doesn't have to be major bold moves. It can be a little bold move, but I want people to thrive. I want people to feel like, especially for people that grew up like I did. I was talking to somebody today who had her own share of domestic violence herself. And so I shared the stories of my mom and how, I overcame it and was able to break this cycle. And she was so excited about the idea that she could perhaps, overcome it. And so I want all of you to just have your best life. And that's why you should buy the book.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a good pitch for the book. Dr. Luana Marques, thank you so much for being my guest today on Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you so much, David. It's really an honor. Loved your questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So I want to let you know that I will get right to work on this. And within the next few days, I'll be sending you links to there'll be links to YouTube where the entire interview will be. And
Okay.
also there'll be a link to an excerpt from the interview. Maybe this last bit that we just had, the pitch for the book. And so that'll be kind of a teaser for people to also get them interested in it. The podcast is audio, and it's people will find it wherever fine audio podcasts can be found. And among the other things that it will contain will be some reflection from me, some commentary about, as I sit and think about, okay, what happened between us. And so you can look forward to that as well. And so keep your eye keep your eye on your email, and I sort of weave all of that together with different elements of music and so on, and so you can look forward to that. And also I'll be offering you a chance to advertise your book, but I think the publicists, they want you to use whatever services they're offering you, but you can consider this as a supplement if you want to.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you and your work, and keep up the good work. The world needs you. And so I'm so glad you're there doing it.
Thank you so much, David. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.